there's lights being shone on all of these different things. So ultimately what it comes down to is we exist to make money, but we exist to deliver something to our consumers that is of value to them. And increasingly we're trying to align on what's important to us and what's important to them.
Hey gang, it's Thursday, June 16th. Dave and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily and eMarketer podcast made possible by Marketing Architects. I'm Marcus. Today I'm joined by our principal analyst who covers our marketing practice. It's Dave Frankland.
Hey Marcus, good to see you.
Hello sir, same to you. Thanks for hanging out today. Today's fact, in 1816, the planet didn't have a summer. Now you know how England feels every year. Silly jokes. As USA Today notes, though, in all seriousness, 200 years ago, in 1816, there was a year without summer after a massive volcanic eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia produced enough dust, ash, and sulfur dioxide to partially cloud the Earth's atmosphere. The entire planet experienced a drop in temperature, as well as other winter-like conditions such as snow in June and frost in August. Do you remember the Iceland one, Dave?
Yeah. I had colleagues that got stuck in various parts of the world.
Because of that, yeah. I had no idea that this was a thing. 200 years ago, no summer. Anyway, today's real topic, the values-driven consumer. Does every brand need a mission? Does your Mayo need a mission statement? Asks Sabira Chowdhury of the Wall Street Journal. Maybe. Unilever kind of thinks so. The consumer goods giant that owns Hellmann's mayonnaise is currently pushing for each of its 400 brands to have a social or environmental purpose. Miss Chowdhury writes, for its Hellmann's mayonnaise, its mission is trying to curb food waste. The article points out that other brands are finding causes to support. England ice cream brand Walls is committed to raising national happiness levels since nobody can be grumpy while eating an ice cream. And Dove has successfully helped push for laws to prohibit discrimination against people based on their hair texture or style. Dave, does Mayo need a mission statement? And are these examples from Walls, from Dove, some of the others, are they too much, too little, or just right?
I thought the best part of this article was the heading, by the way, does your Mayo need a mission statement? Mm-hmm. I found some of the article pretty unfair. There's a variety of things that they talked about that are just good marketing, right? So there's the old adage that nobody goes into a hardware store to buy a drill bit because they want a 1/4-inch drill bit. They're trying to drill a 1/4-inch hole. So good marketing has always been about the outcome. And, understanding what you're delivering to your consumer, to your buyer, has always been something that marketers sought to do. If it's ice cream, you're probably not looking to give toothaches and make people feel cold. You're trying to bring happiness. And that just makes sense to me. And so I felt like they sort of were trying to beat up on Unilever a little bit and then conflated some of their financial performance with some of these initiatives. With that being said, it can go too far. It can get ridiculous. And I think forcing the issue and looking for something where it's not there, it can go too far. I think where they really fell short was on the example of Dove. I think Dove took a really brave tack a few years ago on body image as a topic. Did the Real Beauty campaigning and sort of really shone a spotlight on something that their industry and fashion in general, as well as the sort of beauty industry, has done a disservice in the past and in many cases continues to do so. And I think, they did buck that trend, and you could say, were they doing it for, just for PR purposes? I don't think so, but obviously they got a PR benefit from it. But it was a brave thing to do. And I think looking for what is it that we want to stand for, being explicit about that, making that something that's important to consumers, just makes good sense. If we want to wrap that up and call it a mission statement for Mayo, we can. But ultimately, we're there to sell a product that makes people think, feel, or do something different. And you've got to frame that in such a way that it makes sense to the consumer.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking about brand purpose. What are we talking about here? In the Wall Street Journal piece, Rahul Shah, who until last year ran Unilever's ice cream home delivery business, said that, quote, purpose is a very abstract concept, close quote. Dave, to you, what is brand purpose?
So I think it's wrapped up in the name to some extent, right? It's the purpose for the brand. And I think there are sort of what are known as purpose-driven brands. So think of the likes of a Patagonia, who's always been extremely environmentally conscious, or in the UK, you probably know the Body Shop, for example, which really went out of its way to be anti-animal testing. And that was part of the entire essence of the company. Purpose of every company is to make money, right? I mean, that's why they exist.
Yep.
I think that, like we say, there's been some brands along the way. USA gets a lot of credit for their focus on the military and supporting military families. Tom's Shoes, almost very much popularized the idea of buy one, give one. So these are what you might think of as values or purpose-driven brands versus brands that sort of emphasize different values. So increasingly in apparel, it's all about sustainability and the environment. The circular economy. In consumer electronics, pushing back against the idea of products only lasting for a specific length of time and then they need to be replaced. And so there's lights being shone on all of these different things. So ultimately what it comes down to is we exist to make money, but we exist to deliver something to our consumers that is of value to them. And increasingly we're trying to align on what's important to us and what's important to them. That differs depending on what we do and, frankly, what's important to us and as a business and as often founders or executives.
Yeah. And differs based on the customer as well. The question I asked you about too much, too little, just right depends on the customer, as a lot of stuff does. There is some research from Collage Group. 30% of American adults think brands should always focus on social and political issues, but more, 42%, say they should stay out of them. I believe that's from your report that you just wrote on purpose-driven marketing.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. But then also, on top of that, what do consumers think a purpose is? This really jumped out to me from your report. What do consumers think a brand's purpose is? Nearly 90% think it's important to treat workers fairly and keep them safe. Over 70% of people think brands should be sourcing ethically, supporting local communities, promoting the environment and equality. Just 50% expect brands, going further down the list, to articulate their social values. Just 35% expect them to take a stand on political issues. That's from January. It's from Merkel. That got me thinking, Dave, that you got to make sure you're doing the other things first. It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can't hit self-actualization if you don't have food or shelter.
Yep.
And some of these brands will jump out at a political issue and say, hey, this is how we feel, or a social issues. And it's like, well, hang on, are you treating your workers the right way? Do you care about the planet? Things that they should be taking care of first.
I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. I think too that, again, it comes back a little bit to some extent to what the brand stands for, what they're trying to associate with, and their consistency on that. There's been a lot of push and pull expecting brands to wade in on political and social issues or stay out of. Some of it depends on, I'm happy for the brand to get involved if they agree with me. It's I agree with this player if they say something. If I don't agree, they should shut up and dribble kind of thing, right? So if we're aligned, I'm all on board with them stating their opinion. And then I think, the other side of this is we don't have a longitudinal view on some of this, but it's interesting to think about that notion of worker treatment and safety and that sort of thing. How much of that was accentuated during the pandemic? The whole idea of quote unquote essential workers often being the least well-paid workers. Yep. I think it's in the US, at least, the unionization topic is back front page news. So that idea that how employees get treated matters. And then I think the Me Too movement played a role in that too. I stopped using Uber for about 2 years because of how they treated women. They brought in a new CEO. They've evolved. I'm back to using Uber. Now, I'm a case study of one, but I think we do make decisions like that based on what we see. I have another friend who doesn't buy from Amazon because of how they treat workers. So again, it's one person in each case, but it's deciding where I'm going to spend my money. The only way I can register a real opinion is with my wallet.
Yes, exactly. Unilever's Alan Jope thinks brands with a purpose increase sales twice as fast as those without. He's pointing to Unilever brand Dove as one such example, who helped promote the Crown Act passed this March, which we mentioned, which would ban discrimination against people based on their hairstyle or texture. And he says that Dove's sales last year grew 8%, its fastest growth in 8 years. Unilever partly credited its purpose marketing, saying the company-wide growth rate was 4.5%. Dave, is there any way to really tell, is there any research out there to support statements like these?
I did a lot of digging looking for evidence on this, and it's really hard to find. I think there's two things. One is I think we tend to say things are important to us, but often purpose or values, while we say it's important, is at best a deal breaker when it comes to actually spending our money. Convenience, availability, price, all these other elements will sometimes trump the thing that is supposedly really important to me. The other thing, as I mentioned, I think with Dove as a good example, is that consistency element. Dove has been doing this for multiple years. It's not just coming out, changing their avatar on social media or whatever else and saying this is really important because the calendar hallmark says it's important this month. This has been something that Dove has had a sustained approach toward. And so I think even if you don't agree with a company's stance on something, if you believe that they are authentic and if they are consistent, if you take two extremes, I mentioned Patagonia, let's also look at Chick-fil-A or Hobby Lobby, right? So from a political stance point of view, they would be on opposite ends of the spectrum in the US. I don't think that anyone thinks that Patagonia is supporting the environment just to upset the right wing, or that Chick-fil-A is supporting the charities they support just to own the libs, right? These are companies that believe in what they believe and have been explicit and consistent over time. And I think you don't need to agree, but you can respect where they're coming from.
Yeah. Your point about, looking at the calendar and saying, oh, it's time to support this group of people. I'm surprised, and maybe that's out there, an example I haven't seen yet, but of a brand that in October says Pride Month, because every month should be Pride Month, or Black History Month because every month should be Black History Month because Black history is American history, or Women's Appreciation Month. Taking that and saying, well, how about we just do it in any month, any time of the year, because it matters any month, any time of the year. One benefit these companies could see, even if it's not directly related to sales, based on these actions, Miss Chowdhury of the Journal noting that companies say taking a stance helps them attract top talent, since workers, especially young ones, increasingly expect their employers to reflect their values. Dave, what's the right way to engage the values-driven consumer? You have a section on this in your report.
Yeah, so overall, what I would say is, and I've touched on a couple of these elements already, right? But it's a lot of the idea here is about understanding who you are trying to be as a company and being authentic to that. So we just talked about that in the case of Patagonia and Chick-fil-A, but really being clear and then aligning around whatever that statement or purpose is, and not just, as we say, sort of change your avatar. I think there's consistency, then there's the engagement component. So it's not enough in many cases in this day and age to just make that decision and leave it in an annual report. That has to be communicated. People want to know where companies stand, even if you're not out, again, changing avatars, but at least making it explicit where you do stand on certain things. Really important element is to engage the community, especially important figures in any given community. So you just mentioned things like LGBTQ and other communities where there are community leaders that you can engage to get their opinions. What's the right way to go about this? How do we do this in an inclusive way? How do we do this in a respectful, not exploitative way? And then from an action point of view, to a large extent, I would say, communication is the last thing that you need to be doing, right? So what are you doing to prove that this is important to you? Diversity and pay equity. Have we thought about our IT systems and removing algorithmic biases? Mm-hmm. What are we expecting of our partners and our suppliers? How are we educating our employees? What's the makeup of our executive team and our board? And get all of that done rather than putting out the press release, changing the avatar, changing the packaging to put a flag on it or whatever it might be. That just feels very tokenist and and often ends up being tone deaf because none of the right other stuff has been done right.
Yeah. Like you said, just putting a flag on it, it seems, like even say table stakes, because feeling like you should, with your, with Pride marketing, like the rainbow campaign, turning your brand logo into a flag, you're failing to differentiate. Former Unilever marketing executive Sean Gogarty was saying, who now consults with the company, was saying that you got to be different and do things a little bit differently, and not just do the thing that everybody else is doing because it's that time of the year to do that. And then the second thing that jumped out to me was it's a balancing act. Miss Chowdhury points to deodorant brand Axe as an example, saying it ditched its Axe Effect slogan in 2016 and switched to urging consumers to shed traditional notions of masculinity. But Euromonitor data shows that Axe's US market share went from 9 to 8% 2018 to 2020. Unilever executives say the brand stopped being fun and got too heavy, so they brought the Axe Effect tagline back. Part of this, Dave, is you can't get too serious too quickly because you are still a company.
Yeah, and I think there's an external and an internal reality to that too, right? So you've got to bring the consumers along on that journey. I think Axe, Gillette, others, I think the pivot to talking about toxic masculinity caught a lot of people off guard. I don't think they did a great job of sort of laying out the breadcrumbs to help their customers come with them on that journey. And so it created a bit of whiplash. It ended up being a little bit confusing. The other side of it is just the reality inside these organizations is a lot of brand managers are in a job for 18 months. They look at what worked and what didn't work. If this looked like it wasn't working, I would imagine the next person came in and swung the pendulum back the other way.
Yep. Finally, Dave, Unilever CEO Mr. Jope, who we mentioned earlier, thinks Ben & Jerry's, which supports causes including climate justice and refugee rights, as one. He cites them as one of the best examples of a purposeful brand. You've mentioned a lot of companies already, but what, in your opinion, are one or two brands that are the best examples of a purposeful company?
Yeah, so Ben & Jerry's is a great one. What's really interesting about Ben & Jerry's is when they sold the company to Unilever, they included a clause in the acquisition agreement that they would retain control over their social mission. It was such a big part of who they were as a company. But I've mentioned a couple, right? So I think, like I said, Patagonia, Tom's, I think I'm in danger of sort of veering towards the companies that focus on things that matter to me. I enjoy the outdoors. I care a lot about poverty. And when I see companies doing good things in those areas, they tend to jump out to me. But I think I would even say somebody like a Zappos, from a treat workers fairly point of view, like they tried to pay employees to leave. They celebrate keeping customers on the phone to make sure their issues are resolved. So it can take different forms in different ways. But those are the sorts of things that stand out to me. And like I said earlier, I tend to notice, unfortunately, the ones that don't do it well, and I try to avoid them for as long as I can. But often, it is a trade-off element. A few years ago, I stopped saying I would never buy from some of these companies again. And I changed my language to I only buy from them when I've got no other reasonable choice kind of thing. And so...
well, that's a good distinction, is that, you don't have to, like people who cut the cords, you don't have to go cold turkey. You can be a cord shaver and reduce your services. And so maybe you don't spend 10 times a month with this company, but 2 or 3 times a month with that company. It still makes a difference. One
other quick thing was, in the article you sent, it talked about Unilever back in its very early days in the UK building housing for some of their workers. Guinness did the same in Ireland, and I'm convinced that one of the reasons Guinness is held in such affection by a lot of Irish people is the way they treated workers. Guinness almost went bankrupt during the Irish famine, helping workers. And
really?
Yeah, and so these things tend to, they tend to live long in memories too, when they're doing the right thing by the community, by that mission from the beginning. Yeah,
with Unilever, he's saying the founder built a small town for his employees. Yeah, remarkable stuff. Anyway, that's what we've got time for the lead. It's time now for the halftime report. Dave, your takeaway from the first half?
Overall, I would just say that it's hard not to get sucked into whatever the holiday of the month or the day is. But if you're going to jump on it, to not jump on it and to take a very thoughtful, methodical and lengthy run at that as an issue. If it's something that is important to you, embrace it fully, embrace it throughout the entire organization, do it from an authentic point of view and do it consistently over time.
Check out Dave's report on this, what values-driven consumers really want. Brands should skip the gimmicks and focus on authenticity. It just dropped a couple of weeks ago, June 1st. So if you're a pro subscriber, go to insiderintelligence.com. So we've got time for the lead. Time now for In Other News. But first, a quick word from our sponsor, Marketing Architects. TV advertising is a powerful channel for growth, but the traditional process for launching TV campaigns costs a lot and can be confusing. So marketing architects changed it. With all-inclusive TV advertising, they invest their own money in your campaign. You just pay for the media. They wrote a book about how it works. It covers how booming brands are reimagining TV advertising. Go to marketingarchitects.com/book and click the blue Get Your Free Copy Today button. All right, folks, we are back today in other news. 3 stories about Pride marketing. Dave, so today we're talking about Pride marketing for In Other News. We have 3 articles we wanted to quickly cover. The first one is an article titled, "If Your Pride Marketing Plan is a Rainbow Flag, Think Again," by Eva Keese of Adweek. Turning your brand's logo into a rainbow flag is not a Pride Month strategy, she writes. Across social media, just 14%, 1/4 of Gen Zers looked favorably on rainbow flag campaigns, with support highest amongst baby boomers, 42%, Miss Keese notes. She cites Lataria Coy, head of ethical media at Influential, who thinks that people hate brands profiting off of rainbow capitalism, preferring brands to donate to organizations that will benefit the LGBTQ+ community. Dave, in your opinion, the level up from the rainbow campaign is blank.
It's both good advice and not quite what I would recommend, to be very honest. Just donating money doesn't really do much either, right? I think there's other actions that companies can take. Everything we were just talking about from the point of view of looking internal, what are your processes? What are our structures? What's our pay differential? What's our representation? Do we have employee boards? Like all those other elements are things that companies can do. Making a donation to a valuable charity can be great. I just don't know that it's sufficient in its own right either. It's much better to take some concrete action, not just either throw a flag or throw money at the problem.
Mm-hmm. The second story we wanted to cover was a recent Marketing Dive article by Peter Adams, noting that PepsiCo's sparkling water company Bubbly is using its Pride campaign to promote, number 1, the significance of safe spaces within the LGBTQ community, venues folks feel most comfortable being themselves, and number 2, the chosen non-biological families LGBTQ people form when their actual family may be less accepting or understanding of their identity. The company is also donating to these all-important safe spaces. Dave, the main thing this campaign got right was blank.
I think empathy. I say that as somebody who's not a member of the community. So I'm assuming that they got this right. But based on everything I've read, I think there's a lot of compliments out there for their approach and for the tonality and the message. I think the idea of safe spaces, even if you're not from the community, the idea that there's a need for a safe space should give us all pause for thinking. So I thought it was really well done. I think they covered a lot of the bases. And to me, it was clear that a lot of thought went into it. It was really well shot, really, all those other elements. But it just felt like they got the messaging and tone right. And again, I'm saying that as a middle-aged, straight cisgender male, not aimed at me, but I was super impressed by it, and everything I've read from folks who are in the LGBT community seems to be equally complimentary.
Mm-hmm. For our third story on Pride marketing, we want to talk about Burger King's Pride Whopper leaves a bad taste in people's mouths, writes Passant Rabi of Gizmodo. Burger King Austria recently unveiled a Pride Whopper, which is just like a regular Whopper, but instead of having a bun top and bottom, a bun top and a bun bottom, it comes with either 2 bun tops or 2 bun bottoms. Dave, your takeaway from this story was blank.
Was that this is everything that we just said positive about the other 2 stories. This is they just got everything wrong from what I can tell. First of all, they don't seem to understand the language they're using. It's just crass, insensitive, and dumb. I can't think of anything positive to say about it. And it's that very much, it's not even just putting that flag up you talked about, right? I think they wanted to be a part of the conversation, didn't understand what they were trying to be a part of. if they were trying to appeal to any given audience, I think all they've done is turn people off, other than maybe some homophobic or, adolescent style humor who thinks this is funny. And I think for the rest of us, this is just something that needs to be put to bed. It is absolutely a whopper.
Yeah, that is all we've got time for. Thank you, Dave, for hanging out.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to Victoria, who edits the show. Thanks to everyone listening in. Tomorrow's episode features the surprise question giveaway, where you'll be able to win a free Behind the Numbers Weekly Listen mug. So tune in tomorrow for that, for the Behind the Numbers Weekly Listen, an e-marketer podcast made possible by Marketing Architects.